So, hello, very warm welcome for our participants for today's webinar, Developing and Maintaining Interpersonal Trust in Community-Based Participatory Research. Our speaker today is Majbritt Lyck, who holds a PhD from the University of Bradford. She is also a member of our COREnet. This is kind of a research network who's now organizing this webinar series on participatory and participatory research. And she's also a member of the World of Neighbors, which she's going to speak about. And her current research focuses on the nexus between conflict, migration, and peace building. So this is also part of her presentation today. Please be aware that, as you may have realized when you entered this room, that the session is going to be recorded, and we record it so that we can put the video later on YouTube and share it on social media. You later have the chance to ask questions. You can use the chat or the Q&A box. For that, we will check both. But you also have the chance to raise your hand, to raise your voice, and to ask your question directly to Majbritt Lyck-Bowen today. But if you do so, please raise your hand, then I will unmute you. You have the chance to speak, but please be aware that your voice will be recorded. And in the sense of data protection, we inform you herewith that you give your informed consent that you are recorded and that your voice is also shared then in the social media. So, but please now, Majbritt, the word is yours. The screen is yours.
Thank you. Sorry, this is the issue we had last time. It doesn't seem to be. Let me just quickly try and share again, because it's not, the slides are not moving. Okay, so yeah, just a quick word about A World of Neighbors. This is this really amazing network of practitioners who work in integration and migration across Europe. And what they all have in common is that they believe in the role of religion has a role to play in integration and migration. And my role in that network has been over the last couple of years to support them with providing some training in different areas. And also to do some research. And the research project I'm going to talk to you about today actually came out of a conversation with a couple of the practitioners in A World of Neighbors. So there's that link. So quickly, to have a quick look at the agenda today, I'm first going to introduce you to interpersonal trust and and just have a quick think about why we think this is really important, especially in research in general, but also especially when we talk about participatory research. Then I will quickly introduce the research project I did last year. That's the kind of case study I'm going to use to talk about what kind of actions I took during that project and what kind of challenges I encountered as well in trying to develop and maintain, just as importantly, interpersonal trust. And then hopefully we can have some reflections, questions, and discussions afterwards. Okay, so first, just have a little quick think about what do you think that interpersonal trust means to you? And perhaps have a think about both what does it mean in your kind of everyday life? So how do you conceptualize it in your everyday life? But also what does it mean in your research, especially? So how does it relate to how you interact with your research participants? How do you interact with the gatekeepers and the managers of projects that you work with? So I want you to just have a think about that while I share a couple of ideas about what I think it means and how I use it. Okay, so first quickly work about community-based participatory research. So this is something I've done a couple of times now. And the idea really is that you are trying to, and I think it's more an ideal one. You're really trying to make sure that there is an equal relationship between you and the people that are taking part in the research. So I'll come back to what exactly that meant in my context. But the idea really is that you are responding in a much more sort of intimate way, really, to local issues of concern for the people that are participating in the research. So you have lot less power about what it is that the research is going to focus on and how you're going to carry it out as well. So the idea really is that you are learning from each other, you are equal partners in it, and the idea is it's based on principles of equity and social justice. And I'll be coming back a bit more to what that actually means for me, because I love the model of it, but I still feel that reality sometimes hits and it becomes more of an ideal model than it becomes you can necessarily completely carry out but we'll be coming back to that in a moment. Quick words about interpersonal trust. There isn't any agreed definition about what this really means. There's a lot of different research that has gone on about what trust means and what interpersonal trust means, and there's a lot of complexity around it, and it is very multidimensional as well. So there are many different ways of looking at trust. I have kind of honed in on just on this presentation, really on a couple of concepts around it. So for me, it's about honesty. So it's about telling people what we can achieve. It's about setting expectations. It's about reliability. So it is about really trying to make sure that you do what you've asked, what you have promised to do, so that people can trust that you are delivering what you set out to do in the beginning. It is also something about making sure that you are acting in people's best interests. And I think a lot of these issues are especially important when things are not necessarily going to plan, or when there are when there are situations where people might be a bit more vulnerable, or where might be some risks. It's also important to highlight that any understanding of interpersonal trust is very contextual as well. So we have many different ideas about what it means, and a lot of it depends on the kind of culture we have grown up in. So, for example, when we talk about trusting people, in some communities, they will trust someone because you come from a university. They will think that if you have a certain position within the university, you are more trustworthy. They will think that perhaps your research has been or is being monitored through a research ethic group. So that might be something that make people more trust in what it is you set out to do. In other communities, trust doesn't work like that. In other communities, there is not any kind of accountability if things don't go right. So, for example, in some communities, you'd say, if you were not good at your job as a researcher, the university, you would no longer have a position in the university. In other places, it's not necessarily quite like that. So in some communities, trust is much more to do about the kind of personal relationship you have with people. So it's not to do with your position or your experiences necessarily. It is more to do with the kind of everyday, day-to-day relationship that you're building with them. So I think that's something that is really important to keep in mind, and we'll be coming back to that as well. It's also important that when we talk about trust, it both has a kind of internal, so there's something inside you that might make you trust people, some people more than others, but there's also that kind of interpersonal linked with it. So it is also depending on what it is that you do that might make you less or more trustworthy. It's also important to realize that it is a dynamic process. And I think this is especially important, is that it is something, trust can be gained, trust can be developed, but it can also go the other way again. So if something happens, for example, you can lose people's trust. So especially in a research process, it's important we think about it like that. It's important we think about it as a process, and it's important that we don't necessarily just take it for granted, because I think a lot of us might not necessarily think about the importance of building trust, the importance of maintaining trust when we're doing our research, but that's really important as well. Trust is an important part of any kind of essential human relationship. Trust can help you gain access to participants. Trust can help you get support for your research project. And perhaps most importantly, when we talk about trust, is the disastrous consequences we can have of losing trust. So just think about a research project. If you had lost trust of some of the people that you were working with, what kind of consequences that would have had for your research project. So it's not just about thinking a kind of in a positive, but also really thinking about what happens if we lose the trust of the key stakeholders in our research. Okay, so just a quick introduction to the research I did. And I should say I have lots of experience in many different contexts as well around building trust. So I have also, much of my research has focused on peacekeeping missions, international organizations, and especially religious actors as well. So when it comes to the Q&A, we can talk about that as well. But in this presentation, I'm going to just draw on one project I did. And it came out of a conversation with a couple of the practitioners from A World of Neighbors. All of them were involved in organizing language cafes in different places around Europe. And all of them were really saying that they didn't have enough, or they didn't have a lot of data that they could use when they were applying for funding. So they didn't have much data about what it is that their cafe was doing well and how it was helping people integrate as well. So I decided, and I wanted to look into this, and I decided I first wanted to look into a kind of more general idea about what language cafes can do in terms of integration. So I went through all the literature, came up with lots of different factors that the literature had said language cafes could help with in terms of integration in 5 different areas, so cultural, economic, political, religious, and social integration. And I made a survey around that. But I decided quite quickly that I didn't just want, because quite often when we make a survey, we kind of just go into a community and we take the data and we leave again. And I didn't really want to do that. So I thought, okay, let me make this a kind of 2-track process, and I will do the survey because I think that's important. But I'm also going to offer the cafes that take part in this in the survey an opportunity to develop a research project together with me on anything that they want to do. So I contacted some language cafes. I'll focus on 3 today, but and we had, as you'll see in a moment, we had conversations about what that could be. So the idea was to do the survey, but also then to do a participatory research project on something that was important to that particular cafe. And I should say that the cafes that I'm going to talk about today chose to focus on how the language cafe was creating a sense of belonging. So how did that make sure that people that were participating felt that they belonged in the cafe? And 2 other cafes focused on how do they contribute to making the people that come to the language cafe active citizens. So how do they make sure that they don't just help people within the cafe, but that they actually also make sure that people become active citizens in their local community. Okay, so I want you to start thinking about the kind of central question really for you that we'll be talking about later. How do you develop and maintain interpersonal trust in your research? So this is a question that we'll be coming back to, but I just wanted to put it here so that you can have a think about it while I talk about my experiences. So we'll be coming back to this one. But how do you develop trust in your, and just as importantly, how do you maintain it throughout the research process as well? So part of what I did, I think for me, very important from the beginning was really to get to know the people that were running the language cafes. And it was about not just getting to know them in a professional capacity, but also really to get to know them on a more personal capacity. And that's where it fits very well into that idea around trust building, that you are really trying to get to know people and they're trying to get to know you, because that will help you build that trust. So I had quite a few conversations with them in the beginning. All of these were online, I should say, but coffee conversations. So not just a kind of quick, this is the agenda, this is what we're doing, but just conversations about where we were just trying to get to know each other over a cup of coffee. So I talked a little bit about my professional experience, but I also talked about my kind of personal interest because I really wanted to get to know them and I wanted them to get to know me. So I also then talked about some of the research experiences I'd had in previous projects, perhaps especially highlighting examples of where I thought how my idea about, ideas in conceptualization of honesty, for example, reliability, tricky situation, how had I dealt with tricky situations in the past. Reliability, we talked a lot about making sure that we didn't promise more than we could keep. So I said, I have always tried to make sure that I deliver things on time, I deliver things in a format that's helpful. And with honesty, we talked a lot about the importance of setting expectations and making sure that I understood what their role was going to be and they understood what my role was going to be. So we had a few of those kind of initial conversations. And then we had an online focus group. So I should say the first conversation was mostly with the managers. And then we had an online focus group with staff and managers. And I wish this is where the kind of less than ideal comes in, because I wish we could have had some people that were participating in the language cafes taking part in these meetings as well, but that wasn't possible. So that's where the kind of participatory bit becomes a bit of an ideal model, and reality is something slightly different. But I had some really interesting focus groups with the managers where we had the first one, we determined what we were going to focus on. And then I went away and did some research. They went away and did some research on what we had talked about. And then we came back and we then designed the research process. And we, most importantly, really, we determined who was going to do what. And I made sure I think this is the part of the trust building as well, to make sure that people felt very comfortable about what it is that they felt that they were signing up for. Because part of the challenges of this really was to make sure that the people I was cooperating with really felt that this was going to benefit them. And this was particular in one case, I think, important, because there was one of the participants was very skeptical about collaborating with researchers. He said he had done that before. He had been quite disappointed about the benefits of the research, and he had been quite disappointed about the support that the researcher had provided as well. He felt that the researcher had still just kind of gone into the community, taken the data and left, and not really done anything with it that could help them in any way. So there was quite a lot of, especially from this one person, quite a lot of sort of skepticism over where this was all going to go. A couple of them were also a bit skeptical about what were the benefits of the research going to be. So again, it was for me important to outline what I thought we could realistically achieve. People were also concerned about the time and resources that they had to commit to. And again, I think this is where participatory research sometimes become really difficult, again, to live up to the ideal, because ideally you want people to take a very active role. But in reality, unless you have funding to kind of buy them out of what it is that they're already doing, they will have to fit the participatory research around everything else that they're doing. So again, think definitely a challenge to think about that. There were also some were also concerned about the impact of research on the participants. So again, we talked about what would we be realistically doing. And I think this is another thing we have to really always think carefully about, especially when we talk about trust, is that we have to be open and honest about what the benefits are going to do. And if there are not going to be any benefits for the participants, then we have to be honest about that. Here, I could say that I hope that they would come up with some suggestions as to how to make things better for the language cafe. So I thought for the participants, hopefully they would find a language cafe that was even better than what it was now. I would say another challenge was also that there wasn't enough, because of funding had to be used within a particular period of time. There wasn't as much time as I would have liked to develop the interpersonal trust in this particular phase. I would have liked to have more opportunities to get to know the people better. I would have actually preferably liked to meet them before I started my fieldwork as well. So because of funding and because of time constraints, that wasn't possible. But for me, that was a bit of a challenge as well. I do think you get to know people better and you develop trust better when you're meeting them face to face than when you're meeting them just online. But it wasn't possible because there were the projects were in 3 different countries, basically. And then just want to talk a little bit about what then happened during the field work and how I again sort of try to think about the importance of trust during this particular phase. So first of all, there was the timing of it. And I really tried to make sure that the project decided when that was. Again, so I only wanted them to feel that they could trust that this was going to help them and this was going to be convenient for them. It wasn't about me, it was about trying to help them. The problem with that approach was that there was a bit of a mismatch between the academic time frame, unfortunately, and the community need in one case, because this particular language cafe wanted me to come as quickly as possible because they were going to write an application for funding. And I was quite happy to do that, but the ethics review in my university at the time took longer than I had ever thought it was going to do. So that was a bit of a contrast there. We did in the end go, but I literally got the ethics you can go the day before I left for the project. So that was quite that was difficult, and I had already sort of warned them that I might not be able to actually come on the day that I had promised, which obviously created problems for the trust that they had in me. Anyway, thankfully I did manage to get there on time, and I think again the part of that kind of like personal relationship, thinking about the trust was important there. So when I arrived, we had a meal. I visited the language cafe before the data collection started. I really got to know much more about the place again as well. I also participated in the language cafe's activities. So again, I really wanted them to show that I wasn't just here for the research. I was really here to try to help them as well. And during that phase, we also really outlined the expectations and what I hoped that they could help with and what I was going to do. So for example, they organized, we had decided that we were going to do research interviews, so they organized a schedule for that. I also after every day of interviewing, I had a meeting with them again, just to keep them updated about what had happened, just to give them some of the highlights of what I had collected so far. And the same during the data analysis as well. I had hoped that they would take more active part in the data analysis, but unfortunately their time constraints meant that they couldn't do that. But I did keep them informed all the time. So it was, and I sent them the data and my interpretations of the data, and they commented on it, and so it kind of came back and forward like that. Again, I would say time was definitely an issue. I wish I had more time for the data collection. I had to do sort of 6-7 interviews a day. Which for those of you who've done research interviews will know it's quite a lot. So I do wish that there had been a bit more time, because again, I think developing those relationships would have been better if there'd been more time for that. And I must admit, I didn't overestimate how long it was going to take to do the data analysis, but I think I wasn't quite clued up enough on how many other things I was going to do in that period of time. So I ended up doing quite a lot of overwork because I wanted really to make sure I finished things on time. Okay, quickly coming back to then after the research, and I think this is a really important phase actually, because quite often we sort of stop thinking about how we're engaging in participatory research once the research is finished. But for me, it was actually really important to show them, again, they can trust me. I'm not just going to run away after the research has been finished. I am actually still keeping in touch with them. So first of all, we had conversations about what was the report going to look like. Again, I wanted to make sure that it was helpful for them. I wanted to make sure that their expectations were met, so that this was going to be something that they could do. We also had continuous conversations about, and we still do, about what it's been a year and a half since I did the fieldwork. We had continuing conversations about how you could implement the recommendations that came out of the project. And in one case, one of the things that one of kind of outcomes of the research really was that there was no national network in this particular country for people who were excited about language cafes. So even though my research had finished at the time, I applied for more funding, and I thankfully got some funding to organize an event where we had people coming from many different language cafes and people coming from local authorities as well. And they have started a network, and it's been about a year now, and it's still going strong. So I'm also participating in those network meetings, and I'm helping them develop that network as well. Quickly looking at the challenges, again, finding funding was initially a bit difficult because the research in itself had finished, so I had to actually go and find some funding from a participatory research aftermath funding opportunity. And also, obviously, now, because I'm in a different job, I'm doing different things now. So it's also a continuing challenge, really, to make sure that I'm still supporting these language cafes, because the project has long finished. But I still think it's really important for that trust building that you are continuing that also after the research is finished, so that we are really fulfilling each other's expectations around that, and they know that they can trust me. I have had several of them also coming back to me, asking other questions and asking for advice on other things. So I think that's really important. Okay, so coming back to the question that we started out with, I'm very happy now to take some questions if there are any, and otherwise I'd love to hear from what people's experiences are.
Yeah, thank you first for your presentation, Majbritt. So before we open the Q&A session, I would just would like to repeat or remind our participants that this session is recorded and you have the chance to raise your questions in the chat, or you can use the Q&A box. But if you wish, you can also raise your hand, the virtual hand, and then I can unmute you. And you can just ask your question directly, or you can just share your experience about how to build up and maintain interpersonal trust in your field. But just please be aware of data. I'm just repeating this because of data protection issues. If you raise your voice, you will be recorded, and that means you give your informed consent to be recorded. Yeah, I will just check. I can't see any questions so far in the chat and also in the Q&A box. Not so. Maybe then I can start. Of course, I thought also, how do I develop trust? But I wondered, what do you do if you don't trust? If you realize you cannot trust your interlocutors because maybe they lied to you, or there were some cases of sexual harassment?
That's a good question. I mean, I think it really depends on the situation, because I mean, there could be situations where trust is simply lost and where it cannot be regained again. And I take it in that case, you would, you discontinue your project. You would stop doing the research project that you were doing. In other cases, I think it is again about being open and honest, really, and have an open and honest conversation about the things that have gone wrong. I mean, if it's sexual harassment, it probably means that the research project cannot continue, at least not with you as part of it, if you're the one that has been harassed. But other than that, I would say it is about having those open and honest conversations about what has gone wrong. And I think it is also about really realizing in many cases that it does take time to develop that trust. And that you do have to do things to maintain it as well. But I would say, yeah, I mean, if trust has been lost, in many cases, it's probably about not being able to continue the research. And if you are, then I think it will be about having an open and honest dialogue about what happened and trying to find common ground for ways forward.
Yeah, I'm just continuing asking questions and commenting until there's questions. So please, to our participants, don't be shy. Raise your voice, ask your question in the chat or in the Q&A box. So maybe my research experience is a bit different. I'm doing field research, and I think this is also, it is similar, but it's not the same, because my interlocutors, they don't really benefit from my research as much as I benefit from their trust in me and sharing their information and experience and thoughts with me. And sometimes I had the experience that they are lying to me just because they think then they can somehow benefit of it. So but what I did in my field, and I think this is really interesting, maybe also for your language cafes. Maybe you can also say a few more words about language cafes, what it is about. So I'm from Germany, and I did my field research in Southeastern Europe. And there I couldn't speak English or German with my interlocutors, but I had to learn the local languages. And this is something they were really impressed, because these are languages which are not like world languages, big languages, and that you just learn easily when you don't have any roots in that region. And this, for me, I think is, one of the big steps to building trust.
Yeah, I mean, I think so too. And that's exactly where the kind of prior experiences are important as well, isn't it? And I think there is also, I mean, I've definitely felt that, you can, because I'm a kind of in a situation where I am from Denmark, so I'm Scandinavian, but I'm living in the UK, and I, for example, seen how you can use those different identities as well. I mean, as you did, I traveled quite a lot and did some research in the Balkans, and I definitely felt there that if I was more trusted, interestingly, when I used my Scandinavian connection. So when I said I was from Scandinavia, I was more trusted than when I was British, because I was looking into peacekeeping missions that had a lot of negative experiences with British peacekeepers, for example. So coming from a particular country already gave me, they were definitely more thinking that they could trust me because I was from Scandinavia, rather than if the times I said that I was from Britain. So I think there's something around identity. I'm sure there's also something about that I'll be able to speak a little bit of local languages. So if you are in a situation, again, it's a time thing, isn't it? You can learn some local languages. I would say in this case, one of the countries was an English-speaking country, so I do speak that, and another one was a Scandinavian country, so I could speak with them as well a little bit in their local language. The other one, not at all. But I do think that there is something definitely around that as well, and there is something about having a kind of local insight into how you build trust in that particular context as well, that I think is quite important. So I think there is definitely something around languages that are important. It's about the impression that you give as well, isn't it? It's whether you come across as someone that they feel that they can trust as well, and a lot of that has to do with the prior experiences as well. I would say I've had that in other contexts as well. I would say one of the things I think have helped me many a times is actually really knowing what I'm talking about as well. I find that, when you go and interview people, especially when they think that you really know what you're talking about, and you're not just in a kind of you're not just a journalist, you're not just asking the sort of simple questions and coming up with slightly simpler analysis. You really have a better understanding of the context that they're working in. I had that, for example, when I was interviewing. I think that was probably my biggest challenge in terms of building trust. I was interviewing people from international peacekeeping missions back in Bosnia and Kosovo. And it was very difficult in that situation to build trust, because a lot of the people were used to being, I was interviewing about something quite controversial. I was interviewing them about the degree to which they were taking part in arresting war criminals. And this was at the time, this was something that they had been very much criticized, and they were constantly criticized in the media for not doing enough in this field. So they were used to, when they had people coming in and asking them questions about that, they were used to those questions being very critical and they having to defend themselves. Whereas my mission was much more to try to understand where they were coming from, to try to understand what those issues were, why they weren't doing it. So I had a kind of much broader agenda and a much better insight into all the kind of challenges that they were facing as well. And I definitely felt that had an influence on the trust building part as well, is that once they realized that I wasn't just there to criticize them, I was really there to try to understand them in a much deeper way, that helped them feel that they could trust me as well, that helped them feel that they were, that there was a bit more to it than just the kind of journalism questions that they were used to. So I would definitely say that as well. Having a lot of knowledge about something, having an understanding of something has helped as well. Yeah.
Yeah. We have already 3 questions now in the Q&A box. I hope that we can answer them. So the first question is about how about engaging with polarized contexts, communities in discussing difficult topics? How would you deal with such hesitations and distrust? This goes also for cases when they have been politically instrumentalized.
Yeah, again, I think a lot of it really depends on the context. A lot of it depends on the kind of questions that you are going to ask as well. My background, I should say as well, is in peace building. So I'm very much used to those very difficult conversations. I've done research in Myanmar, for example, with people with different religious communities in Rakhine at the time where there was a violence going on there, and where the Rohingya had just been expelled from the area. I would say it is about very carefully having a dialogue with people. It is about very carefully thinking about how you're bringing people together. It is in a research situation as well. It is about thinking about who should be in the same room at the same time. I mean, if you're, say you're doing interviews, for example, how you can organize it so that you go and visit one side of the community and then you go and visit the other side of the community. But otherwise I would say it is very much about that. And it's also very much about respecting what people want to talk about as well. Because I, for example, had in another research project, I was interviewing people about multi-religious cooperation in terms of integration. So I was talking to people who were taking part in projects where that was organized by people from more than one religion. So for example, where a Muslim organization and a Christian organization had come together to organize a project, an integration project. And one of the things I definitely find out about there while interviewing people was that they didn't mind talking about religion in the context that they were now in. I should say these were refugees and migrants. But many of them didn't want to talk about religion in their home countries. So there was a clear, we don't want to have to talk about that. So it's also about respecting about what it is people feel comfortable talking about, and accepting that there are a lot of things that people might not want to talk about. But I should say, again, in terms of my work with A World of Neighbors, we have worked a lot on creating not just safe spaces for conversations, but also brave spaces for conversations where people can talk about issues that are quite polarizing, issues that they highly disagree on, and where they are potentially not going to agree on it. If you're interested in that, Google my name and Google A World of Neighbors, and you will come up with there will be some guidelines for how you can create a space where people feel or where people can talk about that as well, even when there are polarizing views about something that's going to be much more important, I think, in the near future, because we are living in quite a polarized world at the moment.
We have another question, and it says, did you pay to research participants? This is usually a taboo topic. However, it is usually the most immediate benefit. There are many articles about that. For example, but we just need money, impossibilities of producing knowledge with those vulnerable situations by Jane Friedman and others.
Yeah, so that's a very good question. Again, I did not pay people to participate simply because the university I worked for at the moment would not have allowed me. I would not have, my research ethics would not have gone through the committee if I had said I was going to pay people for it. What I did was I was interviewing people. I was obviously interviewing people who were participating in this language cafe. And I was literally just doing those interviews, or the vast majority of those interviews, on the days where they were coming to this language cafe anyway. So what we did is we asked people to come to be interviewed before the language cafe and after the language cafe, which is also one of the reasons why I had so many in one day. And the other ones I was interviewing were either living nearby, so could walk to the place, or they were taking part in other activities on that same day. So again, I tried to organize my field work in ways that was as convenient as possible for the people that I was interviewing. When that is said, I know some of the language cafes do pay the bus ticket for people to come to the language cafe. But that was independent of my research, simply because my university would not have, at the time, would not have allowed that, basically, for ethical reasons.
Yeah, thank you. The third question was not a question. It was one of the participants had to say goodbye because of teaching. But I think this is a good link. I mean, we are teaching at the university. I don't know if you are teaching how to approach to the field, to the students, and yeah, how do you also teach how they can build trust?
Yeah, I do, and again, I think one of the main things you can do really is to prepare well. And this might sound simple, but one of the things I've always found, for example, when you go to do fieldwork, especially when you're doing it abroad, and especially maybe in our kind of peace building field, is to really know as much as possible about what's happened in that location already. So, for example, I did some interviews some years ago about in Cambodia. And you might know that Cambodia went for a genocide back in the 1970s. And some absolutely horrendous crimes were committed during that genocide. So I read a lot about all of that, simply to feel that when I was talking to the people I was interviewing, they couldn't say anything that I didn't already know in terms of the kind of crimes that had happened. and in terms of the locations that this has happened, and in terms of the history of the place. And again, I think that really helped me, because I think, or I know that the people I was talking to were really, again, feeling that I was genuinely interested, and I genuinely knew what I was talking about. And I think there was something about exactly that. And I can come up with a good example. There was one person I was interviewing during that project that was notably known to be not talking to anyone, known to not even talk to the press. And he was working for a very important civil society organization. And he was known to not give interviews to anyone. And I somehow managed to get through different channels and different friends. I did manage to get access to him. And he had told me, I'll talk to you for 10 minutes and that'll be it. I was like, okay, 10 minutes better than nothing, so I'll take my chances. I came, sat down with him, talked for 10 minutes, talked for 20 minutes, talked for half an hour, reminded him that the 10 minutes had long gone. And he's like, it's fine. I think this is really interesting. This is really relevant. And we ended up talking for 2 hours. And I think part of my success with that was that I really had a very good insight into. So when he was mentioning things, I could ask questions that were absolutely relevant. I could tell him, yeah, I have heard about that already. This is, this is what happened. And I think that actually really helped me in that situation. And I think he had more trust in me, because again, he didn't just see me as someone who were coming in and out and grabbing information and then leaving again, but actually someone who was generally interested in his story, in his life, in what had happened to him, in what had happened to his local community. So I always tell myself, I think one of the basic advice to give really is to just be prepared and do the reading. And one of the amazing things you can do, really, I think, is reading people's own stories, really. So not just reading about it from a kind of historical or context point of view, but actually really reading stories that people have written that were in that particular situation. So, if you are looking into refugees from Syria at the moment, read some of the stories that Syrian refugees have written themselves. So you really get an intimate insight into what's going on for the people that you are engaging with. I think that's a really good, for me, that's a good piece of advice. Do your homework, really.
Yeah, and I think this is a great advice. So what I noted down, so for what do I do to develop trust is, I wrote down something like show interest and be curious. And I think to be prepared, you have to be curious and to learn more. And then what I also experienced at least once was that I went to a sheikh in Kosovo, and I told him about something in Macedonia, about his community there. And he was like, oh, I didn't know that. Why didn't they tell me? I know people there. And he was so happy to know that. Yeah, I mean, this was like that. Then he stopped like seeing me as a little girl. I mean, he was a really old guy. He already died in the last years since I have seen him. But this is also something that has to, yeah, to somehow demonstrate the knowledge that we have and that we are already kind of involved. And in my case, I think what also helped is showing that I'm already part of the network. So with with whom I'm already friends, and some people they also ask me, who did you send you to me? How do you know about me? This is also very an important thing. And another issue was, in some cases, they asked me about my perspective. And of course, the interview was about asking about their perspectives and their experiences, their thoughts, their beliefs, whatever. But I think in these moments, just to share not just my knowledge, but also my experience and what I think is also helpful to build trust, because then they realize, okay, it's not just someone, but it's there's something, even though we're from different countries, we have different first languages and so on. It's yeah, there's something that connects us.
Yeah, I think that's exactly where that kind of personal experiences and personal interests come in, is that you're not just talking about necessarily things that are important for the research, but you're also really connecting to people just as a fellow human being. I think that's really important. And I think I think it's really important what you said about a kind of network as well. I've had that experiences many times as well. Again, I think I actually also did some research in Kosovo, and I had the same. There was a particular person I would really love to interview, and I couldn't get in touch with him, or he wasn't replying. And then I was interviewing someone else, and he was like, "Oh, so who else have you been in touch with?" And I mentioned, this person could be interesting, and he's like, "Oh, I know him. Let me just give him a call." He literally just picked up the phone from the desk, gave him a call, and I was, literally half an hour later, I was in a car on the way to interview this person that I'd been working hard for months to try to get in touch with. So I think in terms of the trust building as well, it becomes that kind of snowballing effect as well, doesn't it? That you build trust with one person, and then you have a foot inside the network, and that trust is then passed on to the next person, because I had a good experience with you, so I will recommend that you to my friends as well, or to people that I have worked with before as well. So I think that's really important as well, is that it can actually give you a foot inside a network. The snowballing effect, you can then get to a lot more people as well. So I think that's important as well.
Yeah, and maybe just a last comment from my side, but I think what this demonstrates is that you have somehow to show your interlocutor or the person you want to interview that you have something in common. If this is language, if this is your background, or if this is an interest in changing the world, or if it's the same belief, I think this is one of the keys to get the trust of others. Yeah, we are almost done with the time. So, but if there's another question or comment, I think we would have time for one more. So while maybe wants to reply to my comment, if you want, you can just take the chance to write the last comment. Yeah. Do you want to respond to what I said with the comment, have something in common?
Oh, okay. Yeah, no, I think that's very important as well, definitely. And I think it is about looking at what, in terms of identity, it is a lot of it is about looking at what it is that you share as well, isn't it? I mean, one of the things, for example, when I did this last round of interviews, a couple of the participants had their kids with them. And I have wonderful kids as well. So we were talking a little bit about parenthood and motherhood and all of that as well, which again, I think, it kind of gives you that kind of connection as well to something that's not relevant for the research, but it helps you develop those relationships, and it helps you say, and actually for me, I often actually also use my background as a migrant, because as I said, I'm from Denmark now, living in the UK. And even though I'm not comparing myself to refugees, I'm very fortunate in many ways, because I can move back to Denmark anytime I would like to. But I have shared experiences of settling in another country, of feeling homesick, of missing friends, of having to build a new network, of struggling to understand how the education system works over here, for example, because it's very, feeling that you're in a different culture. So all of those kind of things are things that I have experienced myself as well, and definitely I use that as well to say, if people are like, oh, and simple things like languages. English is my third language, so when people are saying, oh, my English is not so good, I can say, well, my English is not fantastic either always. It's my third language as well, so that's something we have in common as well. So I definitely think, in terms of that, again, that kind of identity, I think is really important to think about how you can connect, how you can use that to connect with other people as well.
Thank you. I think this was a nice word for finishing this webinar series. Thanks again, Majbritt, for your time, for your insights, for your experience that you shared with us about trust building and maintaining trust. Yeah, and for those who don't know anything about this webinar series, this series is going on. So the next presentation will be from our working group will be on April 10th, and you will be informed about this webinar on the usual way, like mailing lists, LinkedIn, Facebook, or just on the homepage. So please keep updated, and then I'm happy to see you next time. And thanks again for your attention and your interest in this webinar. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.